In the last session, we mentioned the 3 main boundaries for volunteers and introduced 5 major principles to help us handle boundary-related dilemmas. Now, let's explain how to use these 5 principles to deal with situations where boundaries may be blurred. Based on the experiences of the Jockey Club End of Life Community Care, JCECC, project volunteers and our NGO partners, we have summarized the 6 most common cases where boundaries may be crossed. Case 1. Is it acceptable to receive gifts? This case touches on relational boundaries. We can use the principle of avoiding conflict of interest to help us. As a volunteer, you cannot accept any monetary or material rewards from a service user, even if the items are inexpensive. If a service user insists on giving a gift, volunteers should refuse politely, while also expressing gratitude. It is important to let the service user know that you have clearly received their appreciation. Case 2. Is it more important to maintain the autonomy and self-determination of service users or to protect their lives? For example, what should you do if a service user tells you they want to commit suicide but asks you not to tell anyone? This case touches on the boundaries of autonomy and personal privacy. In this case, we can use the principle of beneficence, altruism, and the team-based approach to handle this conflict and ensure the service user's safety. Specifically, patient does indeed have their own autonomy, but if their decision involves a risk to their own life or others' safety, we should be guided by the principle of beneficence, altruism, making the protection of the service user's safety the overriding priority. While we must act for the user's well-being, the volunteer must also report the situation to organization staff, adhering to the team-based approach to ensure proper support is provided. Returning to our example, when a service user expresses suicidal intentions and asks you not to tell anyone, the volunteer should, while ensuring safety and respecting privacy, clearly explain to the service user that you work as part of a team and must report such situations to the organizations for follow-up. Afterwards, the volunteer should promptly report the situation to a social worker so the team can provide appropriate support. Case 3. Conflict of values. This case may touch on the boundaries of right to be informed and autonomy. We can use the principles of non-maleficence and respect for autonomy to handle it. In medical ethics, non-maleficence means avoiding exposing a patient to any undue risk of harm. The principle of respect for autonomy means that once patients fully understand the pros and cons of a treatment, they have the right to make their own decisions. As volunteer, we need to respect the service user's values, even if they are very different from our own. Volunteers should try to listen and be present. If this value conflict persists and affects your relationship with the service user, you should report the situation to organization staff for further handling. If necessary, you can request that the organization reassign you to another service user to avoid conflict. Case 4. Dual relationships. In principle, if a volunteer already knows the service user or has any familial relationship with them, a volunteer service should not be initiated. For example, a volunteer is assigned to an elderly person and, upon meeting, discovers they have known each other for a long time. The elder was the volunteer's hobby class teacher years ago. This touches on the principle of relational boundaries. And we can again use the avoiding conflict of interest principle. Furthermore, volunteers should not, without the organization, knowledge, or permission, privately develop other relationships with the service user, such as a goddaughter or godson-like relationship, as many conflicts of interest can arise from dual relationships. If a volunteer already knows the service user, they can report it to the organization staff and discuss whether to reassign another volunteer. If a service user invites a volunteer to a certain event, the volunteer should first communicate with organization, staff, and obtain approval before attending. Case 5. Confidentiality of privacy. During volunteer service, volunteers may learn about a service user's background and life story. This personal information is the service user's private information and volunteers must adhere to the principle of confidentiality. This touches on the boundary of personal privacy. Under the overarching principle of non-maleficence, volunteers should apply the principle of respect for autonomy and strictly maintain confidentiality. For example, volunteers must not disclose or discuss any of the service user's personal data, medical conditions, or photos in public or private without permission. If a volunteer violates this principle, the service user can pursue legal action. Volunteers should pay special attention to this. Case 6. Conflict of interest. This case touches on relational boundaries, and volunteers can again use the avoiding conflict of interest principle. Sometimes, a conflict of interest isn't about receiving benefits or having a relationship outside of volunteering service. Even actions that seem beneficial to the recipient can constitute a conflict of interest. For example, a volunteer uses a paid service and recommends it to a service user. Although the volunteer does not benefit directly, a perceived conflict of interest could arise if they know the service provider. Therefore, it is recommended that volunteers only provide services that are within their volunteer duties or offered by the organization. If you are uncertain, you should first discuss it with the staff before taking action.